Wow, look at all the secret stuff.
No, don't touch that. It's classified.
But it's so cool.
Stop! What are you doing here?
I just wanted to see you.
Get out now!
Mafia boss confronts a little girl in his office. Then she shows him something. The office tower overlooked Istanbul's glittering skyline, but inside the penthouse, there was only darkness and the hum of expensive surveillance equipment. Dimitri Korsakov stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass, when the elevator doors opened behind him without authorization. He didn't turn around. Men who made it to his position developed instincts. This wasn't one of his men. This was something else. The footsteps were small, light, almost apologetic. When he finally turned, he found a girl no older than 7 standing in his office in a threadbare coat, her dark eyes holding a depth that belonged to someone decades older. "Mr. Korsakov," she said in accented English, her voice steady despite the trembling in her small hands. "My mother said you would know me, that you would understand what this means." She pulled something from her coat pocket, a photograph, faded and worn. Dimitri's blood turned to ice. In the image, himself, 20 years younger, standing beside a woman he'd spent 2 decades trying to forget. And now this child, this impossible child, stood in his office like a ghost made flesh, holding the secret that would destroy everything he'd built. Dimitri Korsakov is the 47-year-old head of the Korsakov criminal organization, one of Eastern Europe's most powerful crime syndicates. Operating from Istanbul, he's built an empire through calculated violence and absolute control. He's a man without weaknesses, or so he believed. Vera is a 7-year-old girl with haunted eyes and an impossible claim. She is the daughter of a woman Dimitri loved and lost 20 years ago in St. Petersburg, a woman he thought was dead. Vera's arrival in his office isn't a chance. It's a calculated move by forces hidden in both their pasts. The setting is Dimitri's penthouse office, a fortress of glass and technology overlooking Istanbul, where Vera has somehow bypassed every security system. The power dynamic is inverted. For the first time, Dimitri is not in control. A child holds information that could unravel his entire world. The phone call came at 3:47 a.m., which meant it was urgent enough to justify waking him. Dimitri Korsakov didn't sleep much anymore. The price of running an empire was perpetual alertness. But when he did, it was in the penthouse office overlooking Istanbul, where he could see threat coming from any direction. His security chief, Konstantin, spoke without preamble. "We have a breach, penthouse level. Someone got past the biometric readers, the pressure sensors, the motion detectors, all of them." Dimitri was already moving toward the elevator. "Killed." "That's the problem, sir. She won't engage. She's just waiting." "She?" "A child, maybe 7 years old. She came up through the service elevator with a key card that shouldn't exist. She bypassed every system we have, and our people are standing down because—" Konstantin's voice carried something Dimitri had never heard from him before: uncertainty. "Because she's alone and she doesn't seem afraid." Dimitri's mind cycled through possibilities. A rival organization sending a message, a test of his security, a trap. Nothing made sense. In his world, children were either leverage or irrelevant. They didn't walk into a mafia boss's office at 3 in the morning and sit calmly waiting. The penthouse doors slid open silently. Dimitri stepped into the space that was part office, part fortress, all dark glass, surveillance equipment, and the invisible weight of decisions that had cost people their lives. The girl was sitting in one of his leather chairs, feet not quite touching the floor, wearing a coat that had seen better years. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes, when they met his, held a gravity that didn't belong in a 7-year-old's face. She was holding a photograph. "Mr. Korsakov," she said, her accent carrying the faint trace of something Eastern European. "My name is Vera. I've come to tell you about someone you used to love." Dimitri's hand moved to the gun at his hip, a purely reflexive gesture. The girl didn't flinch. She simply waited, as if his violence was something she'd calculated and decided she could survive. "How did you get past my security?" His voice was level, but underneath the words was a current of fury that could have moved mountains. "I was given a key," Vera said simply, "by someone who knows how your systems work, Someone who's been watching you for a long time. She extended the photograph. I think you'll want to see this. Dimitri didn't take it. Instead, he pressed a button on his desk. Konstantin appeared in the doorway within seconds, flanked by 2 armed guards. Search her, Dimitri commanded. Tell me everything she's carrying. The guards approached carefully, as if the child might detonate. What they found was surprisingly substantial for someone so small. The photograph, a leather journal with pages marked and annotated, a birth certificate, medical documents, and a sealed envelope with his name written in handwriting that made his chest constrict. The handwriting he'd tried to forget for 20 years. Leave us, Dimitri said quietly. Konstantin hesitated. Sir, this is. Leave us. When they were alone, Dimitri finally took the photograph from Vera's hands. The image was faded, the colors washed out by time. It showed 2 people, a younger version of himself, dressed in his early criminal days, and a woman. A woman with dark blonde hair and eyes that held an entire lifetime of music and hope and things Dimitri had spent 2 decades learning to destroy. Katia. She's dead, Dimitri said flatly. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that he'd accepted so completely that it had become the foundation of everything else. Your mother, if that's even who she is, Katia is dead. She died in 1994, car accident. That's what you were told, Vera replied, and her voice carried the weight of someone who'd rehearsed these words 1,000 times. But she wasn't dead. She was hiding. She was alive, and she was waiting, and she was raising me. Dimitri's hand trembled as he opened the journal. The first entry was dated November 1994. If you're reading this, and you don't recognize my name, then you've become exactly what I was afraid of. My name is Katia Volkova, and I loved a man named Dimitri Korsakov. I loved him enough to let him go when I understood that the life he was choosing would destroy us both. This is the record of what happened after. He skipped forward through entries. Years of her handwriting. Entries about escaping St. Petersburg. Entries about learning she was pregnant. Entries about watching news reports of Dimitri's rise through organized crime, of his name appearing in intelligence reports, of watching him become a man she wouldn't recognize. And entries about Vera. Birth, first words, first steps, birthday after birthday. A mother documenting the child she was raising alone, while the father built empires of violence across Eastern Europe. How did you find me? Dimitri asked, though part of him already knew the answer would complicate his life in ways he couldn't yet foresee. My mother left instructions, Vera said. When she got sick, she left everything. Journals, documents, photographs, and a name, the archivist. She told me that when the time was right, the archivist would help me find you. And did this archivist bring you here? He arranged it, Vera confirmed. He gave me the key card. He told me what to say. He said you would refuse to see me unless I came in person, unless I showed you proof, unless I made it impossible for you to deny that I exist. Dimitri moved to the window. Below him, Istanbul sprawled in darkness, millions of lives moving through the night without knowing that the man looking down at them had just had his entire understanding of reality fractured by a 7-year-old girl. Your mother, he said slowly, is she here in Istanbul? She died 3 months ago, Vera said, and for the first time her composure cracked. Her voice trembled slightly. Cancer. It started in her lungs and spread. She was in pain for a long time, but she wanted to stay alive long enough to make sure everything was documented, long enough to make sure I would be safe. Dimitri closed his eyes. Katia, alive all these years. Katia, raising their daughter. Katia, documenting the empire he'd built while she wasted away from cancer in some hidden location while he was celebrating victories and consolidating power. The guilt was suffocating. What does the archivist want? Dimitri asked. Because people don't send children into fortresses out of charity. There's always an angle. The archivist wants you to know the truth, Vera said. About yourself, about what you've become, about what my mother never stopped believing you could be. And what's that? Someone who can choose differently. Dimitri turned to face her fully. This small girl with her mother's eyes and her mother's quiet intensity, sitting in his chair like she owned it, like she'd been born knowing that she had the right to exist in his world. "Do you know what I do?" he asked her. "Do you understand what kind of man you're talking to?" "Yes," Vera said without hesitation. "My mother told me everything. The organization, the violence, the people who were hurt because of the choices you made. She didn't hide it. She thought I deserved to know who you really are. And yet here you are." "Because she also believed you deserved to know who I am," Vera said. "And she left instructions for what happens next. There's a man she called the archivist who has information about your organization, about things that happened before you inherited it, about things that were done to build the foundation of everything you control." Dimitri's mind was already calculating. A leak from within his organization, someone with information, someone organized enough to coordinate a child's infiltration of his penthouse, someone with access to the kind of intelligence that could destroy him. "If your mother is dead," Dimitri said carefully, "and the archivist is a stranger, then who takes care of you?" "That was my mother's last instruction," Vera said. "She said I should come to you. She said that you were the only person who could protect me, because you would understand that having something worth protecting changes everything." Dimitri pressed a button. Konstantin appeared in the doorway immediately. "Secure the building," Dimitri said quietly. "No one leaves, no one enters. I want to know the identity of everyone who's been near my security systems in the last week. I want to know who made that key card. And I want eyes on everyone in this organization, because we have a traitor and he's been working against us." "What about the girl?" Konstantin asked. Dimitri looked at Vera, who met his gaze without fear. A 7-year-old girl who just walked into the center of his power and told him his entire life was built on a foundation of lies and compromises. "She stays," Dimitri said. "Put her in the guest suite. Get her food, clothes, whatever she needs. And Konstantin," he waited until his security chief was fully focused, "if anything happens to her, if even one person in this organization causes her a moment of discomfort, you will answer to me personally. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Konstantin paused at the doorway. "Sir, what about the archivist, if they contacted her?" "They'll contact us," Dimitri interrupted, "because now we have something they want, and I need to know exactly who this archivist is and what they're planning." After Konstantin left with Vera, Dimitri returned to the journal. He read late into the night, moving through 20 years of his lover's life in written form. He read about her fear, her hope, her unwavering belief that somewhere inside the man he'd chosen to become, there was still someone capable of change. He read an entry from just weeks before her death. "Vera asks me why I didn't tell her father about her. She's too young to understand that some loves have to be sacrificed for survival. But maybe she's also old enough to understand that her father made a choice, and now I'm making a choice for her. I'm giving her the chance to know him. Not the man he became, but the man he could have been. Whether he takes that chance, that will be his choice to make." Dimitri sat in darkness as dawn broke over Istanbul, holding the journal of the woman he'd abandoned, raising the daughter he'd never known existed, and understanding with absolute clarity that his organization had just become secondary to something far more dangerous. A reason to reconsider everything. St. Petersburg, Russia, November 1994. The concert hall was packed despite the cold that seeped through the old building's walls. Dimitri sat in the back row, watching the stage with the focused intensity he brought to everything in his life, a quality that would either make him powerful or destroy him, depending on the choices he made in the next few years. The piano opened with a cascade of notes that seemed to hold all the longing of the Russian winter itself. Katia Volkova sat at the bench like she was born there, her pale blonde hair catching the stage light, her body moving with the music as if her bones were made of melody. She was 24 years old and already the most celebrated pianist in St. Petersburg. But more than that, more than her technical perfection or her emotional interpretation, she was untouched. There was something about her that the violence and darkness of their city hadn't managed to corrupt. Dimitri had been sent to the concert by Vadim Petrov, the crime boss who'd recruited him 3 years earlier. Vadim didn't attend cultural events. He was a man of action and power, not art. He'd sent Dimitri because he wanted intelligence on a cellist in the orchestra who had connections to the underground political resistance movement. Instead, Dimitri had fallen in love. After the performance, he waited outside the stage door. He told himself he was there for the intelligence, that he was only going to introduce himself to gather information, that this was business, nothing more. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. She emerged wrapped in a burgundy coat, her dark eyes still somewhere in the world of Chopin and Rachmaninoff she'd just inhabited. When she saw him, she didn't look afraid. She looked curious. "You were watching me from the back row," she said in Russian, her voice carrying the musical quality that extended into her speech. "Third row from the back, left side. You didn't move for the entire performance." "How could I move?" Dimitri replied, and the honesty in his voice surprised both of them. "You were performing." She studied him for a moment. This young man in expensive clothes that were trying too hard to announce wealth, with violence barely hidden beneath his careful politeness. "What's your name?" she asked. "Dimitri Korsakov." Her expression shifted. She'd heard the name. Everyone in St. Petersburg had heard of Vadim Petrov's new lieutenant, the young man who was becoming infamous for his ruthlessness. "You work for Vadim," she said flatly. "I do." "Then you should leave," she said, but she didn't move away. Instead, she stood there in the cold, her breath visible in the November night, waiting to see if he would be honest. "I was sent to gather intelligence on someone in your orchestra," Dimitri admitted. "But that's not why I stayed." "Why did you stay?" "Because watching you play music made me remember that there are things in this world more important than power." She smiled then, a sad smile that held the weight of someone who'd already understood that beautiful things in their city didn't survive for long. "Then you're more dangerous than I thought," she said. "Because if you understand that and you still choose to work for Vadim, it means you've already decided that power matters more." Over the next 6 months, Dimitri showed up at every performance. He would sit in the same seat and watch her play. After each concert, they would walk through St. Petersburg's frozen streets and talk. She would tell him about music, about beauty, about the resistance movement that she'd become involved with, people trying to create a new Russia, one without crime syndicates and corruption and violence. He would tell her about his childhood, about the poverty that had driven him into Vadim's organization, about the way power felt like the only antidote to helplessness. "You can leave," she would say over and over. "You can choose something different." "And do what?" he would ask. "Work in a factory, live poor. You don't understand, once you're in Vadim's organization, there's no leaving. The only way out is death." "Then you're already dead," she would reply. "You're just still breathing." By April of 1995, Dimitri was spending every spare moment with her. He would skip meetings. He would miss operations. He would stand in concert halls and pretend that the man he was becoming, the man Vadim was molding him into, didn't exist. And Katia loved him, not the version of him that Vadim wanted, but the version underneath, the boy who still remembered beauty. "Come with me," he said one night as they stood on a bridge overlooking the frozen Neva River. "Leave St. Petersburg. Leave the country. We could go somewhere where your past doesn't matter, where we could build something clean." For a moment, she considered it. He could see it in her eyes, the fantasy of a different life. A life where she played piano in concert halls and Dimitri was just a man, not a lieutenant in a criminal organization. "I can't," she finally said. "My family is here. The resistance needs musicians who can move between worlds, who can communicate information through underground networks. I can't abandon them." "And I can't leave Vadim," he said. "If I try to leave, he'll have me killed. He'll have you killed." "Then we're trapped," she said simply. "Not if we run now. Tonight we could." "No," she interrupted. "We couldn't, and you know that. You know that the moment we tried to leave, Vadim would find us. He wouldn't allow you to escape alive, and he'd torture you before he killed you just to remind everyone what happens to traitors." Dimitri pulled her close, and she held him. and they both understood that this was the end of something before it had ever really begun. 3 weeks later, Vadim called him into his office. "You're distracted," Vadim said flatly. "You're thinking about a woman, a pianist named Katia Volkova." Dimitri's blood turned to ice, but he said nothing. "I'm going to give you a choice," Vadim continued, lighting a cigarette. "The organization or the girl, you can't have both. The woman has connections to the resistance movement. That makes her a liability. That makes you a liability if you continue this relationship." "And if I choose her?" Dimitri asked, already knowing the answer. "Then I kill you both and move on. I have 20 men who could do your job, but I've invested in you, Dimitri, so I'm offering you a choice. Walk away from her, completely. Never contact her again, and I'll let her live. You'll never see her again, but she'll live." Dimitri made the choice that would define his life. He chose power. He chose the organization. He chose to become the man Vadim was molding him into, and he chose to do it by erasing the only person who had ever made him believe he could be something different. He went to her apartment and told her he didn't love her. He told her it was an assignment, that he'd been using her for intelligence. He told her that she meant nothing to him, and that if she tried to contact him again, he would have her arrested for her connections to the resistance. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with such profound sadness that he realized he'd already become the thing he'd always feared, a man so broken that he could destroy the most beautiful thing in his life just to survive. 2 months later, Vadim told him that Katia was dead. "Car accident," Vadim said. "Sad, really, but it's no longer your concern. She's gone, and you're free to focus on the organization." Dimitri believed him, and he spent the next 20 years believing that the woman he loved had died because he'd chosen wrong. He spent 20 years turning that guilt into fuel for his rise through the criminal underworld. He spent 20 years becoming exactly the man Katia had feared he would become. He never knew that she'd escaped, that she'd used her resistance connections to flee St. Petersburg, that she'd carried his child and raised their daughter in hiding, documenting everything, waiting for the moment when he might finally choose differently. He never knew that the last thing Katia wrote before she died was a message for him. "Dimitri, if you're reading this, it means Vera found you. I forgave you a long time ago for the choice you made. I hope that someday you can forgive yourself. Not because what you did was right, but because holding on to that guilt is the only thing keeping you trapped in Vadim's world. Vera is your redemption, not from your crimes, but the first real choice you'll ever have to make with full knowledge of what's at stake." Present day, Istanbul penthouse. Vera had been in the penthouse for 3 days, and she showed no signs of leaving. Dimitri watched her from across the breakfast table as she ate with the precision of someone who'd learned to do everything carefully. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for comfort or attention. She simply existed in his space with the quiet acceptance of someone who'd already accepted the worst thing that could happen. "Tell me about your mother," Dimitri said, pushing a glass of juice toward her. Vera set down her fork. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How she survived, where you lived, how she raised you." Vera was silent for a moment, considering the question. "We moved a lot, different cities, different countries. My mother said we were traveling for her career, but I understood eventually that we were hiding. She was careful about where we went, who we talked to, what we left behind." She paused, taking a sip of juice. "She died in Prague. We had an apartment there for the last 5 years. That's where she got sick. That's where I watched her get worse and worse until—" Vera's voice didn't break, but something in her eyes dimmed. "Until she couldn't anymore." "How long were you alone with her body?" Dimitri asked quietly. 3 days, Vera said. "Before the archivist came, he brought papers. He made arrangements. He told me that my mother's final instruction was that I come to you." Dimitri leaned back in his chair. Every piece of information about the archivist made him more dangerous. Someone with the resources to forge documents, to arrange bodies, to coordinate a child's extraction from Eastern Europe and infiltration of a guarded penthouse. "Your mother left you in the care of someone you just met," Dimitri said, not accusing, just observing. My mother left me in the care of someone she trusted, Vera corrected. Someone who'd helped her escape when I was born, someone who's been protecting us since then. And does this archivist have a name? My mother called him the archivist. That's all I know. Dimitri stood and walked to the library section of his office. He pulled out one of the journals that Konstantin had catalogued, leather-bound, filled with Katia's handwriting. He opened it to a random page and began reading passages aloud. I can't go back. Even if Dimitri wanted me to, even if he begged, I can't risk him finding us. He's in too deep now. He's chosen the organization over everything else, and that choice is poisoning him. I can see it in how he looked at me when he told me the lie. The man I loved is already dead. What's left is just a body still moving. Vera listened, without interrupting. He turned to another entry, dated 3 years later. Vera asked me today why her father doesn't visit. She's old enough now to understand that people have fathers. I told her the truth, that her father made a choice that meant he couldn't be in our lives. She asked if that meant he didn't love her. I told her that love and presence aren't always the same thing. Sometimes the people we love have to be far away to keep us safe. Dimitri closed the journal. Your mother spent 20 years documenting her life in hiding, documenting you, and she spent all that time talking about me like I was a ghost. Because you were, Vera said simply. You were dead to her, but she couldn't stop loving the memory of who you were. There was a knock at the office door. Konstantin entered, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he was delivering bad news. Mr. Korsakov, Nicholas is asking to meet with you. He's been asking repeatedly since the girl arrived. He's concerned about a security breach of this magnitude. Of course he was. Nicholas was Dimitri's second-in-command, his oldest friend in the organization, the man he'd brought into the business 20 years ago. If anyone would notice that something fundamental had changed, it would be Nicholas. Tell him I'll see him in 1 hour, Dimitri said. And Konstantin, where is the girl sleeping? Guest suite on the east wing. She has everything she needs. Clothes, food, books. Add a security detail outside her room. No one goes near her without my approval. Yes, sir. When Konstantin left, Vera watched Dimitri with unsettling calmness. Nicholas doesn't like me, she said. How do you know that? Because he's wondering why you haven't killed me yet. Because in his world, a breach this significant would mean death. Because I'm a threat to the organization, and the organization is all he cares about. Dimitri sat back down across from her. Your mother documented a lot about me, but she also left instructions, didn't she? The archivist mentioned information about the organization, about things that happened before I inherited it. Yes, Vera confirmed. My mother found out things, bad things. She documented them. What kind of things? Vera reached into her pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope, unmarked except for a date written on the front, October 1994. My mother said you should read this when you were ready. She said it would explain everything. Dimitri took the envelope, but he didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he looked at this small girl who'd somehow penetrated his fortress and upended his entire understanding of his own life. I need you to understand something, he said quietly. The organization doesn't forgive weakness. Your arrival here, the fact that I've allowed you to stay, this is being interpreted as a weakness. There are people in my organization who will want to use you against me. There are people who will see you as a problem that needs to be solved. I know, Vera said. My mother explained that. She said you would have to choose, protect me or protect yourself. And what did she think I would choose? She thought you'd finally choose differently. The meeting with Nicholas happened in the boardroom overlooking the Bosphorus. Dimitri entered to find his second-in-command standing at the window, his posture tense with controlled fury. We need to talk about the security breach, Nicholas said without preamble. A child walked into your office through sealed doors. That shouldn't be possible. Someone on the inside helped her. Someone gave her access. I know, Dimitri said calmly. And Nicholas turned to face him, his dark eyes searching Dimitri's face for something he wasn't finding. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. Nicholas's expression shifted. Excuse me. I said I'm doing nothing. The girl stays. The investigation into how she got access is suspended. Dimitri, that's not. You can't just ignore a security breach of this magnitude. Every man in this organization will assume that you're vulnerable. They'll smell weakness. Then they'll have to learn to live with it, Dimitri said flatly. The girl is my responsibility now. Your responsibility. Nicholas's voice rose slightly, something Dimitri had rarely heard from him. She's a child, a complete stranger who somehow penetrated your security, and you're protecting her. She's not a stranger. The moment the words left his mouth, Dimitri realized he'd made a mistake. Nicholas's eyes sharpened with interest and suspicion. What do you mean she's not a stranger? Who is she? Dimitri didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied his second-in-command, the man he'd brought into the organization 2 decades ago, the man he'd trusted with his life, the man who suddenly seemed like a variable in an equation he didn't fully understand. That, Dimitri said slowly, is information I'll share when I'm ready to share it. And if the men ask questions, Nicholas pushed, if they want to know why we're harboring a child who bypassed our security, then you tell them it's not their concern. You tell them that if anyone so much as looks at her wrong, they answer to me, personally. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice. You're making a mistake, Dimitri, and when this blows up in your face, I won't be able to protect you. I didn't ask for protection, Dimitri replied. I asked for loyalty. Loyalty to what? To a man who's protecting a mystery child. That's not loyalty, that's suicide. Nicholas turned and walked toward the door. When he reached it, he paused. The men are already talking, he said quietly. They're saying you're compromised. They're saying you're vulnerable. And in this organization, vulnerability is an infection. It spreads, and it kills. After he left, Dimitri stood alone in the boardroom, holding Vera's sealed envelope, and understood with absolute clarity that he'd just declared war on his own organization. And he had no idea, yet, that the war had been coming for 20 years. The encrypted message arrived at 2:13 a.m. through channels that shouldn't exist. Dimitri's computer security specialist, a man named Yuri, had built the system to be unbreakable. The message bypassing it meant something fundamental had changed. Dimitri read it alone in his office, the sealed envelope from Vera still unopened on his desk. Mr. Korsakov, by now you've met Vera. By now you understand that the woman you loved didn't die in 1994. By now you're beginning to understand that everything you believe about your rise through the organization is built on a foundation of lies. I'm writing to accelerate your education. My name is the Archivist. I've been documenting your organization for 20 years. I've been protecting Katia and Vera for 20 years. And I've been waiting for the right moment to contact you. That moment is now. Vadim Petrov didn't tell you the truth about anything. He didn't tell you that Katia was alive. He didn't tell you that she was pregnant. And he didn't tell you about the scope of the operation you were helping him build. The organization you think you inherited isn't a crime syndicate. It's a trafficking network. For the last 30 years, Vadim has been moving women and children through Eastern Europe and into forced labor situations across the continent. Thousands of people, thousands of lives were destroyed. And you, whether you knew it or not, you helped build that machine. I have documentation, medical records, transport manifests, financial records, photographs, testimony from survivors, everything you need to understand exactly what you've been a part of. In 72 hours, I'm going to contact you with instructions for what happens next. You'll have a choice. You can turn over this information to federal authorities and testify against the organization. You can expose everything Vadim built and ensure that the people responsible face justice. Or you can protect your empire and watch your daughter grow up knowing that her father chose power over morality. Either way, the truth is coming out. The only question is whether you're part of the solution or part of the problem. The Archivist. Dimitri read the message 3 times. His hands didn't shake. His breathing remained controlled, but something fundamental in his chest had fractured. He pressed a button on his desk. Konstantin appeared within minutes. "I need to know everything," Dimitri said quietly. "Everything about the organization. I need financial records, operation manifests, anything that documents what we've been doing for the last decade. Bring it all to me." "Sir, that's classified information. If someone sees you—" "I don't care," Dimitri interrupted. "Bring it now." For the next 8 hours, Dimitri sat alone with documentation that painted a picture of horror. Vessel manifests showing transport routes, financial records showing payments for labor placement services, medical examinations of women before they were placed, financial accounting for what women and children were worth when converted to profit. The math was meticulous. Vadim had built a factory of human suffering, and Dimitri's rise through the organization had been built on the bones of thousands of people. He found Vera in the penthouse library, reading a book about the French Revolution. She looked up when he entered, her expression immediately registering his distress. "You opened it," she said. "The letter from the archivist." "A message," Dimitri corrected. "On my encrypted system. Only someone inside the organization could send it there." Vera set down her book. "My mother said that would happen. She said the archivist would contact you once I was safe." "Your mother knew about this plan?" Dimitri asked, though he already knew the answer. "She designed it," Vera said simply. "While she was sick, while she was dying. She spent her last months making sure everything was documented, everything was organized, everything was ready for when I came to you." Dimitri sat across from her. "The archivist mentioned that I have a choice, that I can either turn the organization over to authorities or I can protect my empire. Did your mother have thoughts on which choice I should make?" Vera picked up her book again, and Dimitri realized she was reading her mother's journals. Because that's what the books were, Katia's documented thoughts, her life, her hopes and fears and instructions for her daughter. "My mother wrote that the hardest choice is the one that costs you everything," Vera said, reading aloud. "She wrote that real love isn't protecting someone from consequences. Real love is accepting the consequences of your choices so that the person you love doesn't have to." "Your mother was wise," Dimitri said quietly. "She was in pain," Vera corrected, her child's voice carrying adult weight. "She was dying and afraid and angry at you for becoming exactly the thing she was terrified you would become. But she still loved you. She loved you enough to create a plan to save you from yourself." That afternoon, Dimitri called a meeting with his senior leadership. 12 men who'd built the organization with him, who'd benefited from the empire, who would fight to the death to protect it. He presented them with the same information the archivist had presented to him. The room was silent when he finished. "These documents are fabrications," one of the men said finally. "Some kind of attack on the organization." "I wish that were true," Dimitri replied. "But I've verified them. 3 of our transport managers have already confirmed the accuracy of these manifests. The organization is guilty of exactly what these documents describe." "What are you saying?" Nicholas asked from his position at the table. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked like recognition, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "I'm saying," Dimitri said slowly, "that Vadim built this organization on human trafficking, and I've been complicit in that, whether I understood the full scope or not." "So what?" another man said aggressively. "We've all been complicit, we've all benefited. Are you suggesting we turn ourselves in?" "No," Dimitri said. "I'm suggesting that we have 72 hours before the archivist releases this information to federal authorities. We have 72 hours to decide what kind of men we are." "We're survivors," Nicholas said quietly. "We're men who did what it took to survive." "That's a nice way to describe profiting from the enslavement of thousands of people," Dimitri replied. "I'm asking you to consider something different." The meeting ended in chaos. Half the men left to contact lawyers. Half the men left to start liquidating assets. And Nicholas remained, watching Dimitri with an expression that suggested he understood far more than he should. That night, another message arrived on Dimitri's encrypted system. You called a meeting. You showed them the documentation. You told them the truth. That was exactly what needed to happen. The organization is beginning to fracture from the inside. Federal authorities are already aware of what's coming. They're preparing their case. But understand this, Vadim isn't in Istanbul. He's in a compound in the mountains of Bulgaria, protected by men who are loyal to him and entirely willing to die to keep him alive. He's aware that you've discovered the truth. He knows what's coming. And he's already decided what he's going to do about it. Protect your daughter, Dimitri. Keep her close. Because in the next 72 hours, Vadim is going to try to take from you the only thing that matters. Dimitri closed the message and immediately went to Vera's room. She was asleep, surrounded by her mother's journals, looking small and fragile and utterly defenseless. He sat beside her bed and understood with absolute clarity that the choice was no longer theoretical. It was immediate. It was life or death. And Vadim Petrov was coming. The investigator Dimitri hired was named Sarah Chen, a former FBI agent who'd gone private after becoming disgusted with institutional limitations. She worked from a secure location outside Istanbul, building her case against the Korsakov organization with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years putting criminals away. What she uncovered was worse than the encrypted messages had suggested. The trafficking network is international, she told Dimitri over a secure video call. We're talking about a systematic operation spanning 15 countries. Women and children are recruited, sometimes voluntarily, more often through deception, and moved through a network of safe houses and transport routes. Once they reach their destinations, their documents are confiscated and they're forced into labor. Sex work, factory work, domestic servitude. The organization makes roughly 40 million euros per year from this operation. Dimitri listened without interrupting, though every word was a physical weight. I've verified the financial records, Sarah continued. Your organization has been liquidating assets over the past month. Someone inside is moving money, preparing for collapse. And something else, federal authorities have been investigating this operation for 3 years. They have an informant inside your organization, a high-level informant. Do you know who? Dimitri asked. No, the FBI keeps that information compartmentalized. But whoever it is, they've been feeding information to the authorities for years. The case against Vadim Petrov alone is prosecution-ready. They're just waiting for the moment to move. After the call ended, Dimitri sat in darkness and understood that the archivist wasn't just someone trying to expose the organization. The archivist was working with federal authorities. That night, the assassination attempt came. Dimitri was escorting Vera from the library to her room when the explosion ripped through the east wing of the penthouse. The blast threw him forward, and he instinctively covered Vera, shielding her body with his own as glass and debris rained down around them. For a moment, there was only ringing silence. Then gunfire erupted from multiple positions in the building. Go, Dimitri commanded Konstantin, who appeared from the smoke like a ghost. Get her out, now. Sir, we need to. No arguments. Take her to the backup location. The safe house in the Sultanahmet district. Don't stop. Don't trust anyone. Vera grabbed his arm. You're coming with us. I have to stay. I have to slow them down, buy you time. No, Vera said, and her voice carried the absolute certainty of a child who'd already lost everything and refused to lose more. My mother didn't send me to you so I could lose you too. We leave together or we don't leave at all. The building shook as another explosion hit the west corridor. Whoever was attacking had military-grade explosives and inside knowledge of the penthouse's layout. Dimitri made a choice that his old self would never have made. He ran with his daughter. Konstantin led them through service corridors, avoiding the main exits. They made it to the basement parking garage just as the main elevators exploded in a cascade of fire. Dimitri shielded Vera as they ran toward the armored vehicle, bullets ricocheting off concrete walls. The drive through Istanbul's night streets felt like crossing into another world. Dimitri kept looking in the mirrors, waiting to see headlights pursuing them, but the attacks stopped the moment they left the building. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in the old city, protected by security he'd established years ago for situations exactly like this. Vera collapsed onto a sofa, shaking, while Dimitri checked the perimeter. "Is anyone else coming?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Dimitri replied honestly. "That attack was professional, coordinated. It came from inside." "The archivist?" Vera asked. "No, the archivist was protecting you. The attack came from Vadim, or someone trying to prevent us from going to authorities." Vera stood and walked to a locked cabinet where Dimitri kept emergency documents. She opened it, somehow knowing the combination, and pulled out a sealed USB drive. "My mother left this," Vera said. "She said if things went wrong, if we had to run, I should give this to you." Dimitri plugged the drive into a laptop. Files appeared, documents, photographs, financial records, but also a video file dated 3 weeks before Katia's death. He clicked it. Katia appeared on screen, her face thinner than in the photographs Dimitri had seen, but her eyes still holding that same quiet intensity. She was in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm, and she was looking directly at the camera as if she could see through 20 years of separation to speak directly to Dimitri. "If you're watching this," Katia began, her voice still carrying the musicality of her youth despite her illness, "it means Vera reached you. It means you're finally understanding what happened. And it means, Dimitri, that you're faced with the choice you should have made 26 years ago." She paused, gathering strength for the next words. "I'm not going to tell you that you're a good man. We both know you're not. You've spent 2 decades building something monstrous. You've benefited from suffering. You've made choices that destroy lives. And I hate that. I hate what you became." She coughed, waited a moment, and continued. "But I also know that you're the man who sat in concert halls and listened to piano music. The man who asked me to run away. The man who kissed me in the snow and told me he wanted something different. That man is still in there, buried so deep you probably don't remember him. But he's there." Katia's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I've spent 26 years documenting what you built, not to destroy you, but to save you. Because the only way out of that organization is through exposure. The only way you become something other than what Vadim made you is by facing exactly what you've done and choosing differently." She reached toward the camera, her hand trembling. "Vera is your redemption, Dimitri. Not from your crimes, nothing redeems those. But she's your first real choice. She's your chance to be the man I believed you could be. The man who chooses love over power, who chooses protection over the empire." Katia's breathing was labored now, but she forced the final words. "There's a man you work with, someone you trust. His name is Nicholas Petrov. He's Vadim's nephew, but he's been helping me for years. He's the archivist. He's been building the case against Vadim with federal authorities. Trust him, work with him, and for the first time in your life, choose something that costs you everything." The video ended. Dimitri sat in silence, the weight of Katia's dying message settling over him like concrete. "Your mother," he said slowly, "knew that Nicholas was Vadim's nephew." "She knew everything," Vera said. "She had access to information through the resistance movement. She spent 20 years building a network to document the organization, and she chose to trust Nicholas with that information because she believed he was different from his uncle. And the archivist is." "Nicholas," Vera confirmed. "My mother's protector, your FBI informant, the person who orchestrated everything, my escape, the documentation, the federal investigation." Dimitri's phone rang, an encrypted number he didn't recognize. He answered to hear Nicholas's voice for the first time in 3 days. "Dimitri," Nicholas said quietly, "we need to talk about what happens next. And we need to talk about whether you're ready to bring down everything you've built." "Where are you?" Dimitri asked. "Closer than you think," Nicholas replied. "And Mr. Korsakov, I'm sorry about the penthouse, but Vadim just declared war, which means the choice isn't theoretical anymore. It's immediate, it's survival." The line went dead. Dimitri looked at his daughter, this impossible child who'd walked into his office with a photograph and a purpose, and understood that everything he'd built was about to collapse. And for the first time in his life, the prospect of losing his empire felt like the possibility of saving himself. If Dimitri's journey from empire to accountability has moved you, if you felt the weight of his choices, the possibility of redemption, the moment when power finally becomes secondary to love, we want to hear from you. Because this is the turning point. This is the moment where a man has to choose between everything he built and the one person worth building for. Like this video if you believe that change is possible, even for people who have done terrible things. Subscribe to our channel because we tell stories about transformation, about the cost of choices, about the people who bet their lives on the possibility of redemption. Comment below and tell us, do you think Dimitri can actually change? Can a man who profited from human trafficking find redemption? And most importantly, what would you choose if you had to give up your entire empire to save your daughter? Your thoughts matter, because these are the questions that define us. These are the moments where we discover who we really are. We'll read every comment. We value your perspective, and we can't wait to see what you think happens next. We'll see you in the next chapter. The apartment was in Tarlabashi, one of Istanbul's poorest districts, the kind of place where Dimitri Korsakov's organization would never think to look because men like him never looked down. The walls were water-stained, the windows barred, the neighbors suspicious of anyone new. It was perfect. Dimitri paid cash for 2 months and kept the paperwork minimal. The landlord didn't ask questions. People in this neighborhood understood that everyone was running from something. For 3 days, they didn't leave. Dimitri had Konstantin bring supplies, food, clothes, a laptop with military-grade encryption. They existed in a kind of suspended reality, watching news reports of the penthouse explosion on a small television with a crackling antenna. The official story was a gas leak. 4 security guards were killed, a regrettable accident. No mention of Dimitri or Vera. On the 4th night, Vera's composure finally broke. She'd been sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the barred window at the narrow street below, when the trembling started. Not the physical shaking of someone cold, but the deep, bone-level shaking that comes from a child's nervous system finally processing the reality of what it had survived. Dimitri was preparing dinner, simple pasta, nothing elaborate, when he heard the sound. Not crying, something worse. The sound of someone trying to cry but unable to find the release. He found her curled on the bed, her body rigid, her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. "Vera," he said quietly, sitting beside her, "look at me." She didn't. She kept staring at the wall with an intensity that suggested if she looked away, something terrible would become real. "My mother is dead," she said, her voice fractured. "She's dead, and I'm 7 years old, and I'm hiding in a terrible apartment in a terrible city, and my father is a criminal, and people are trying to kill us, and my mother is dead, and I'm never going to see her again, and—" She couldn't finish. The words broke into something that was half sob, half scream, the sound of a child's grief finally exceeding her capacity to contain it. Dimitri held her while she fell apart. He didn't try to comfort her with words or promises. He simply held her and let her break, because sometimes that's the only thing a broken person can do for another broken person, witness their shattering and not look away. When the worst of it passed, when Vera was exhausted and hollow-eyed, she spoke in a whisper. "I was supposed to make you choose differently," she said. "That was my job. My mother wrote that down in her journals. I was supposed to show you the proof, and you were supposed to choose me over the organization. But everything is still broken. You're still hunted. I'm still an orphan. My mother's dead and nothing is fixed." "No," Dimitri said quietly. "It's not fixed, but we're alive, and we're together, and we're going to testify against the organization. We're going to make sure that what your mother documented gets used to bring down the people who destroyed her life." "But my mother is still dead," Vera said, and the simple truth of it hung between them. "Yes," Dimitri acknowledged. "She is, and nothing I do will change that. Nothing will bring her back, but I can honor her by choosing to be different, and that's what she asked me to do. On the 5th night, Nicholas came to them. He arrived at midnight, moving through the Tarlabashi streets like he belonged there, like the poverty and danger were just details to navigate. He looked different in person than Dimitri remembered, older, worn, like a man who'd spent 2 decades carrying secrets that were slowly crushing him. Vera answered the door without fear. She'd understood somehow that Nicholas wasn't a threat, that he was the piece of her mother's plan that would finally move them toward resolution. "We need to move soon," Nicholas said without preamble. "Vadim knows you're in Istanbul. He has people searching the city. It's only a matter of time before someone finds this place." "Then what do you suggest?" Dimitri asked. "Federal authorities," Nicholas replied. "You contact the FBI, you turn yourself in, you become a witness in exchange for protection." "And Vera?" "She stays in witness protection with you. But Dimitri understands what this means. You're going to prison. You're going to testify against men you've worked with for 20 years. Men who will want to kill you. Men inside the prison system who have reached. This isn't freedom. It's trading one kind of captivity for another." "But it's the right choice," Dimitri said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes," Nicholas confirmed. "Your mother understood that," he said to Vera. "She spent 20 years accepting that the only way out was through. She couldn't escape her disease, but you could escape this. And your father can escape his past, but only if he chooses it." Dimitri looked at this man, Vadim's own nephew, the person his uncle had raised, the man who'd chosen to betray his family to stop the trafficking operation. He understood that Nicholas had been making the choice to change for longer than Dimitri had. "Why?" Dimitri asked him. "Why did you become the archivist? Why did you turn against your uncle?" Nicholas was quiet for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent 2 decades with a secret that consumed him. "Because I was 17 when I first learned what the organization really did. My uncle told me about it like it was a business opportunity. He said I should be proud that I came from a family with that kind of power. And for years I was proud and I was complicit and I was a coward." He paused, looking at Vera. "Then I met a woman. She was being transported through one of our networks. She managed to escape momentarily, and I found her hiding in a warehouse. She told me what my uncle had done to her, and something in me fractured. I didn't know what she'd told me. I couldn't go back to pretending it was just business." "What happened to her?" Vera asked. "She survived," Nicholas said. "She escaped the country. She built a new life. But she also told me about an organization that was documenting human trafficking, and I contacted them, and I became their informant." He looked at Dimitri. "Your lover, Katia, she was the one who connected me with the resistance network. She understood that I wanted to destroy my uncle's organization from the inside. She became my handler, my guide, the person who kept me sane while I was pretending to be loyal to Vadim." The revelation hung between them. "She loved you," Nicholas said to Dimitri. "Even after you abandoned her, even while watching you build the organization that destroyed thousands of lives. She still believed you could change, and she spent 20 years building the infrastructure to make that change possible." "How long until they come?" Dimitri asked. "Hours, maybe less. Vadim has sent people through the neighborhood. They're searching methodically." "Then we need to leave," Dimitri said. He looked at Vera. "Pack only what you can carry. We're going to the FBI. We're going to tell them everything. And we're going to make sure that your mother's sacrifice means something." Vera nodded and went to gather her things, the journals, the USB drive, the few clothes they'd brought. She moved with the efficiency of a 7-year-old who understood that survival meant preparation. As Nicholas moved toward the door to scout the exit route, Dimitri called after him. "Why are you helping us, after everything?" "Because Katia asked me to," Nicholas replied. "And because she was right. You can change. People can change. All it takes is understanding exactly what you've done and choosing to be different anyway." He stepped into the hallway and looked back. 3 minutes, be ready." Dimitri heard the voices from the street below. Men calling out names. Men with guns, systematically moving through the neighborhood. Men sent by Vadim Petrov to ensure that his empire would never be threatened by testimony. But they were minutes away, and Nikola's was here, and Vera was ready. And for the first time, Dimitri Korsakov was choosing something worth more than power. He was choosing to save the people Vadim would destroy. He was choosing to bring down the empire. He was choosing his daughter. The FBI field office was in a converted warehouse in the Fatty district, far from the gleaming governmental buildings where normal bureaucracy happened. This was where the dirty work occurred, where deals were made with criminals, where futures were bargained, where men made impossible choices. Special Agent Michael Tors was waiting for them. He was a man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who'd seen too many organizations destroyed and too many victims never find justice. When Dimitri walked in with Vera and Nikola's, Tors' expression didn't change. He'd been expecting this. "Mr. Korsakov," Tors said, extending his hand. "I'm Special Agent Tors. We have a lot to discuss about your cooperation and the protection we can offer your daughter." Dimitri didn't shake his hand. Instead, he turned to Nikola's. "Before we do anything," Dimitri said quietly, "we need to talk, alone." Tors looked like he wanted to object, but something in Dimitri's expression made him nod to the other agents. They left, taking Vera with them. She went without resistance, understanding that her father needed to have this conversation without her present. When they were alone, Dimitri sat across from Nikola's and studied the man who'd been orchestrating events for 20 years. "You've been playing me," Dimitri said flatly. "Yes," Nikola's replied without hesitation. "From the moment you met Katia, I knew about the romance because Katia told me. I watched you make the choice to abandon her, and then I spent 2 decades putting together the evidence that would force you to choose differently." "Why?" Dimitri's voice was controlled, but underneath it was the sound of betrayal. "Because you were my friend," Nikola's said. "Because watching you become exactly the man Vadim wanted you to be was like watching someone commit suicide in slow motion. And because Katia believed you were worth saving." "But you orchestrated everything," Dimitri continued. "You arranged for Vera to reach me. You fed information to the FBI. You coordinated the attack on the penthouse." "Vadim coordinated the attack," Nikola's corrected. "I arranged for you and Vera to escape. There's a difference." "Is there?" Dimitri asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've manipulated every choice I've made since Vera arrived." "Yes," Nikola's said simply. "I manipulated you. I gave you a daughter and forced you to confront what you'd become. And I knew that if you were the man I believed you could be, you would eventually choose the right thing. But I couldn't leave that choice to chance. Too many people were dying. Too many victims would never get justice if you continued running your empire." Dimitri stood and walked to the window. Through it, he could see the Bosphorus, the dividing line between continents, between lives, between who he'd been and who he was becoming. "If I testify," Dimitri said, "I'm going to prison." "Yes," Nikola's confirmed. "I'll spend years in a cell. Men inside will want to kill me. Vadim will want to kill me. I'll lose everything." "Yes," Nikola's said again. "And you believe that's justice?" "I believe it's accountability," Nikola's replied. "For you, for the organization, for everyone who profited from human trafficking. The only way this ends is if you testify. The only way Vadim goes down is if you're willing to speak about what you built with him." Dimitri turned back to face his oldest friend. "You should have just told me the truth from the beginning," Dimitri said, "instead of manipulating me." "Would you have listened?" Nikola's asked. "Or would you have killed me and buried the evidence and continued your empire?" Dimitri didn't answer because they both knew the truth. "I'm sorry," Nikola's said, "but I'm not sorry for orchestrating Vera's arrival. I'm not sorry for pushing you toward this choice, because the alternative was watching thousands more people suffer while you built your wealth on their bones." Dimitri's testimony began 3 days later. He sat in a federal courtroom and for the first time articulated the reality of what he'd built. He described the trafficking networks. He named operatives. He provided access to financial records that showed decades of profit from human suffering. He spoke about Vadim Petrov's vision for the organization and how it had evolved from simple organized crime into something far more systematic and evil. The prosecutor was relentless, pushing him to remember details, to be specific, to ensure that every crime was documented and prosecutable. But the defense attorney was worse. She attacked him, suggested he was a liar, implied that his testimony was motivated by revenge against his organization. She called him a criminal trying to reduce his sentence by testifying against others. Everything she said was true. And Dimitri answered honestly about every bit of it. Yes, I'm a criminal. Yes, I profited from trafficking. Yes, I'm complicit in thousands of crimes. Yes, I'm testifying to reduce my own sentences. And yes, that makes my testimony unreliable by every measure except one. It's the truth. His testimony lasted 4 days. By the end, there was no question that Vadim Petrov was guilty of a systematic human trafficking operation that spanned multiple countries and multiple decades. The arrests began immediately. Dimitri watched from a secure location as federal authorities moved through Istanbul, apprehending members of his organization. Men he'd worked with for 20 years, men who'd fought alongside him, men who'd built empires with him. They were taken into custody one by one. Konstantin was arrested at his home. Yuri, the security specialist, was taken at his office. Dozens of operatives, managers, and facilitators, all arrested within hours. And then came the announcement that made it official. Vadim Petrov, age 78, had been arrested in a compound in Bulgaria, attempting to flee the country. He was extradited to Turkey to face charges of racketeering, human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Dimitri's empire, the empire he'd spent 20 years building, collapsed in a single day. That night, Nicholas visited him in the safe house, where he was being kept before transfer to a federal facility. "How are you holding up?" Nicholas asked. "I'm about to spend the next 20 years in prison," Dimitri replied. "How do you think I'm holding up?" "Better than you deserve to be," Nicholas said. "Which is what I'm trying to tell you. The prosecutor has agreed to recommend a reduced sentence in exchange for your cooperation. You're looking at maybe 12 to 15 years instead of life. You'll get out while you're still young enough to have a life afterward." "What about you?" Dimitri asked. "I'm accepting immunity from prosecution in exchange for my testimony and my service as an informant," Nicholas replied. "But I'm done. I'm leaving the business. I'm going to disappear and try to build something that doesn't cause pain." Dimitri stood and embraced his oldest friend. It was the first time he'd acknowledged that despite everything, despite the manipulation, despite the orchestration, despite the betrayal, Nicholas had done what Dimitri couldn't have done on his own. He'd forced Dimitri toward redemption. "Thank you," Dimitri said quietly. "Don't thank me," Nicholas replied. "Thank Katia. She was the one who believed you could change. I just set up the circumstances and hoped she was right." When Nicholas left, Dimitri was alone with his thoughts and the knowledge that tomorrow he would be transferred to a federal prison to await trial. His empire was gone. His freedom was gone. But Vera was safe. The victims of his organization would have their day in court. The trafficking networks were being dismantled. And for the first time in his life, Dimitri Korsakov understood that losing everything might be the only way to gain something worth having. 12 months later, the town of Antalya's coastal district was unremarkable, the kind of place where tourists came to disappear and locals asked no questions about newcomers. Dimitri lived in a modest apartment overlooking the Mediterranean, working as a consultant for a criminal justice nonprofit that was, in reality, a front for his ongoing cooperation with federal authorities. His new name was Dimitri Volkov. He'd been assigned a past by the Witness Protection Program, a Russian accountant, divorced, estranged from family. It was vague enough to deflect curiosity and close enough to his real expertise to seem plausible. His wealth was gone. The accounts had been seized and liquidated. Billions of euros, blood money, every euro of it, redistributed to trafficking victims through victim compensation funds. He lived on a modest stipend from the government, roughly $2,000 per month, enough to survive, enough to ensure that he would never again have the resources to build an empire. But more importantly, enough to understand what normal people's lives actually felt like. Vera was 10 years old now. She lived with him, attended school under a false name, had learned to laugh again. The transition from child of a dying mother to daughter of an imprisoned father hadn't been easy, but Vera possessed something that most people never developed: the understanding that her survival was her responsibility, and that responsibility was something to be proud of. "Dad, I got an A on my history essay," Vera announced, dropping her backpack by the door. She'd started calling him Dad about 6 months into their new life. Not Dimitri, not the man who'd built empires, but Dad, the person who picked her up from school and helped with homework and made sure she ate vegetables. "What was the essay about?" Dimitri asked, genuinely interested. He'd learned that fatherhood meant actually being present in the small moments. "The fall of the Ottoman Empire," Vera said, settling onto the kitchen stool. "How empires collapse when the foundation becomes corrupt. How systems built on oppression eventually destroy themselves from inside." Dimitri smiled at the irony. "Sounds like you've been paying attention." "The teacher said my analysis was sophisticated for my age," Vera continued. "She asked if my parents were historians. I told her my mother was a pianist and my father worked in, what did we say? Administration." "Consulting," Dimitri replied. "I work in consulting." The irony of explaining his former career as consulting wasn't lost on him. That evening, Dimitri attended his weekly therapy session with Dr. Aylan Demir, a psychologist working through the same nonprofit. The sessions had started as a requirement of his witness protection agreement, but they'd evolved into something more genuine. "How are you managing the guilt?" Dr. Demir asked, as she did most weeks. "It's not something you manage," Dimitri replied. "It's something you live with. Every day I wake up understanding that decisions I made destroyed thousands of people's lives. That understanding doesn't fade." "But you've channeled that understanding into something productive," Dr. Demir noted. "You're consulting with federal authorities to dismantle trafficking operations in other countries. You're helping victims access compensation funds. You're rebuilding your relationship with your daughter." "I'm serving a 13-year sentence while technically living free," Dimitri said. "That's not redemption. That's just a different kind of prison." "Yes," Dr. Demir agreed. "But it's a prison you're building with intention, not one built for you by someone else. That matters." On a Saturday morning, Dimitri took Vera to visit Katia's grave. They'd arranged for Katia to be reburied in Turkey, in a small cemetery outside Istanbul. The funeral had been private, just Dimitri, Vera, and Nicola's. The headstone was simple: Katia Volkova, 1972-024. She lived fully. "I bring her flowers every month," Vera said, placing a bouquet of lavender, Katia's favorite, against the stone. "I talk to her about school and things I'm learning. I tell her about you getting better at being a father." "Do you think she can hear you?" Dimitri asked. "No," Vera said practically. "But I think saying things out loud makes them real. That's what my mother taught me. Words have power." They sat in silence for a while, the Mediterranean breeze carrying salt air and the sound of distant waves. Dimitri was struck, not for the first time, by how completely Vera had accepted the complexity of her life. She didn't demand that her father be entirely good or entirely bad. She simply accepted that he was a man attempting to become something different. "Mom wrote about you in her journals," Vera said. "Things she never told you while she was alive. She wrote about how she fell in love with you the moment she saw you in the concert hall, how she knew even then that you were capable of choosing darkness, but she also knew you were capable of choosing light." "And which did I choose?" Dimitri asked. "Both," Vera said. "You chose darkness for 20 years, and now you're choosing light. That's not redemption, it's just being human. Mom said redemption was for people who believed in the possibility of being saved. She said what we all really need is the possibility of changing. The work with federal authorities continued steadily. Dimitri provided detailed intelligence on trafficking operations across Eastern Europe. He helped identify hidden networks, financial flows, and processing centers. His information led to 43 arrests across 5 countries. More than 200 trafficking victims were rescued. Federal prosecutors had offered him early release several times, arguing that his cooperation exceeded the requirements of his plea agreement. Dimitri had declined each offer. "I need to serve my time," he'd told Agent Tors. "Not for redemption, but for accountability. If I walk free while my victims are still healing, what message does that send?" On the anniversary of Katia's death, Dimitri received a letter. It had been held by his lawyer and only released now, per Katia's instructions. The envelope was sealed and labeled, "For Dimitri, to be opened 1 year after my death." He opened it alone in his apartment, while Vera was at school. Inside was a letter in Katia's handwriting. "Dimitri, if you're reading this, it means a year has passed since I died. It means you're still alive. It means you're still choosing, still becoming, still trying. I'm writing this from a hospital bed. I'm in pain. I'm afraid. I'm angry at you for becoming what you became. But I'm also proud of you for the man you were before that and hopeful about the man you might become after. You asked me once what love meant. I told you it was choosing someone again and again, even when they disappoint you. I've chosen you 1,000 times. I chose you when you abandoned me. I chose you while raising our daughter alone. I chose you while I was dying. And I'm choosing you now in writing this letter for you to read after I'm gone. Dimitri, you don't deserve redemption. None of us do, really. But you deserve the possibility of change. Vera deserves a father who understands that his past doesn't define his future. And the victims of your organization deserve to know that the man who helped destroy them is now working to save others. I'm giving you that possibility through Vera, through my documentation, through Nicola's, through this letter. Be the man I believed you could be. Not for me, I'll be gone, but for yourself, and for our daughter. Love, Katia." Dimitri read the letter 3 times, sitting in darkness. Understanding finally that Katia's forgiveness wasn't about absolving him of guilt. It was about insisting that guilt didn't have to be permanent, that accountability could lead to change. That even men who'd built empires on suffering could choose differently. When Vera came home from school, Dimitri embraced her, not as a criminal holding a hostage, but as a father holding his daughter. "Your mother left me a letter," he said. "She wanted me to know that she believed in my ability to change." "She believed in a lot of things," Vera replied. "Most of them turned out to be true." That night, as he tucked Vera into bed, Dimitri understood something fundamental. His empire was truly gone. Not just seized and destroyed, but replaced with something incomparably more valuable, a real life. One moment at a time, one choice at a time, one daughter at a time. 2 years later, Dimitri stood on the balcony of his apartment overlooking the Mediterranean and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd thought about money. Not because he didn't need it. The $2,000 monthly stipend was a genuine constraint, but because acquiring more had stopped being the central organizing principle of his existence. He was 49 years old. His hair was graying at the temples. The lines around his eyes were deeper, carved by years of guilt and processing. But when he looked in the mirror now, he recognized the face staring back at him. It was his own, not the constructed image of a crime boss, not the desperate performance of a man trying to be untouchable, but simply the face of someone learning to be human. Vera was 12 now. She'd grown taller, her mind sharper, her understanding of the world more complex. She excelled in school. She had friends. She joined a rowing team, channeling some inherited musical grace into physical movement across water. She was thriving in a way that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago when she was a 7-year-old carrying her mother's final instructions into her father's office. That afternoon, she came home from school with news. "I'm applying to a boarding school for gifted students," she announced. "In Switzerland. They have a program for students interested in human rights law. Dimitri felt something in his chest contract. You want to leave? I want to study, Vera corrected. I want to understand how to help people the way my mother tried to help people, the way Nicola's helped people, the way you're trying to help people now. She paused, sitting across from her father at their small kitchen table. Mom wrote that the biggest gift you can give someone is believing they're capable of change. I want to spend my life giving that gift to people who have been trapped by systems. I want to be a lawyer who helps trafficking victims get justice. Dimitri understood that his daughter had transcended him. She wasn't just surviving her past, she was transforming it into purpose. The trauma that had shaped her childhood was becoming the fuel for a life dedicated to preventing that trauma in others. Then you should apply, he said. You should be exactly who you want to become. The letter from Nicola's arrived 2 weeks later. It had been redirected through official channels, federal authorities monitoring correspondence from incarcerated individuals in the Witness Protection Program. Dimitri opened it with complicated emotions. Nicola's was serving a 7-year sentence, having accepted a reduced plea deal in exchange for his cooperation and testimony about his uncle's organization. He'd been in a minimum security facility in Bulgaria for 2 years. Dimitri, I'm writing because I need to know how you're doing. Not through official reports or witness protection check-ins, but in your own words. I've had a lot of time to think here. Time to process what I did, manipulating Vera's arrival, orchestrating your exposure, playing chess with your life like it was a game I had the right to control. I told myself it was justified. That saving thousands of trafficking victims was worth the betrayal of a single friendship. I'm not sure that math was correct. Katia believed you could change. I believed in the possibility of your change. But I never asked whether you wanted to change. I just forced the choice and hoped you'd make the right decision. That's not redemption. That's just a different kind of control. I'm writing to ask your forgiveness, not expecting to receive it, but needing you to know that I understand what I did. I understand that I was a friend who betrayed your trust, and I'm accepting the consequences of that betrayal. They tell me you're doing well in witness protection, that Vera is thriving, that you're consulting with federal authorities to dismantle trafficking operations. I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be. If you ever want to visit, I'm at the Pazarjic facility in Bulgaria. They allow visitors, but I understand completely if you never want to see me again. Nicola's. Dimitri read the letter 3 times. His first instinct was anger. Nicola's had orchestrated everything, forced every choice, controlled his path toward redemption. But his second instinct was understanding. Nicola's hadn't been wrong about the need for Dimitri to change. He'd just been wrong about the right to force that change. He showed the letter to Vera. Are you going to visit him? She asked. I don't know, Dimitri replied honestly. He forced my redemption. That's not something you just forgive. No, Vera agreed. But understanding is different from forgiving, and Nicola's is asking for understanding, not forgiveness. 6 months later, Dimitri made the trip to Bulgaria. The prison visiting room was stark, tables and chairs, guards observing from strategic positions. Nicola's looked smaller than Dimitri remembered, worn down by years of captivity in a way that suggested incarceration was extracting a cost even from someone who'd chosen it. They sat across from each other, without speaking for a long moment. You look well, Nicola's finally said. Vera's going to boarding school in Switzerland, Dimitri replied. She's going to study human rights law. She's going to help people. That's remarkable, Nicola's said, and something in his voice suggested genuine pride. Your daughter is going to be extraordinary. She's already extraordinary, Dimitri said. She survived her mother's death and her father's crimes and the complete upheaval of her life, and she's chosen to transform that suffering into something meaningful. That takes more strength than anything I've ever done. You've transformed suffering too, Nicola's pointed out. You've helped federal authorities dismantle trafficking operations. You've testified against your entire organization. You're serving accountability. You forced me to transform, Dimitri said quietly. That's the difference. Vera is choosing her transformation. I'm serving mine because I had no choice. Is that still true? Nicholas asked. Do you still have no choice? Or have you had 2 years to choose your path and you've chosen to keep walking it because it's the right thing? Dimitri didn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated. The choice Nicholas had forced had become, over time, genuinely his own. He'd had opportunities to disappear, to start over somewhere else, to live a life unconstrained by accountability. But he hadn't taken those opportunities because the work of helping dismantle trafficking operations mattered. The witness protection program's constraints mattered. The intentional rebuilding of his life mattered. I understand what you were trying to do, Dimitri said finally. I don't forgive the manipulation, but I understand it. That's more than I deserve, Nicholas replied. 3 years later, Dimitri received word that his appeal for early release had been approved. He'd served 6 of his 13-year sentence, but federal authorities' requests for his continued cooperation had become less urgent as the trafficking networks were systematically dismantled. The judge approved his release with conditions: continued cooperation with authorities, continued residence in Turkey, continued monthly check-ins with federal agents. Dimitri was 52 years old, and he was being offered freedom. He sat alone in his apartment and realized that freedom meant something entirely different now than it had in his criminal years. Then, freedom meant the ability to do whatever he wanted without consequence. Now, freedom meant the ability to choose accountability, to choose his daughter, to choose meaningful work. He called Vera, who was in her 2nd year at boarding school, studying international human rights law. I'm getting released, he told her. Good, Vera said simply. You've served your time, you've done the work, and there's still so much to do. What do you mean? Mom wrote that we don't get to decide when our work is finished. We only get to decide to keep showing up. You've shown up. Now you get to keep showing up, just with more freedom to do it. That night, Dimitri stood on his balcony and looked out at the Mediterranean. The water that had been a backdrop to his witness protection life now felt like something else, a boundary between who he'd been and who he'd become. He wasn't redeemed. The victims of his organization would never get back what he'd taken from them. His crimes had destroyed lives that could never be fully restored. But he'd spent 3 years doing the work of accountability. He'd spent 3 years raising his daughter and learning to be a father. He'd spent 3 years helping federal authorities rescue trafficking victims and dismantle networks. The chains that had bound him weren't physical anymore. They were internal: the weight of accountability, the commitment to continue the work, the choice to remain constrained by his own conscience rather than by legal requirement. And as he stood looking at the water, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Dimitri Korsakov understood that this simple moment of peace, this ability to be present with the consequences of his past while building something different in his future, this was what real freedom looked like. Not escape, not redemption, but the genuine possibility of change. And in that possibility, in that choice made every day, he was finally truly unchained. Dimitri's empire didn't fall because of law enforcement or federal intervention. It fell because a 7-year-old girl walked into his office and forced him to confront a truth he'd spent 26 years running from, that the man he'd become had destroyed the woman he loved. This is the story of a man learning that real freedom isn't the absence of chains. It's the choice to keep them on because you finally understand what you're protecting. Like this video if you believe that change is possible, even for people who have built empires on suffering. Subscribe to our channel because we tell stories about the moment everything changes, about the cost of choices, about the people brave enough to face their past. Comment below and tell us, at what moment did you realize Dimitri could actually change? And if you want to see what happens next in this world, comment Part 2 and let us know. Thank you for witnessing this story. We'll see you next time.